Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Tech.Strong.Women, where we feature amazing women doing amazing things in tech. I'm Jody Ashley, executive producer here at Tech.Strong, and I'm here with my co-host, Tracy Reagan, creator and CEO of Deploy Hub. And, in her free time, she's busy working with the Linux Foundation, where she sits on the board of the OpenSSF and the CDF Technical Oversight Committee. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to give you a quick update on what's happening here at Tech.Strong. Registration is open for DevOps Unramp on May 4th. Speaker submissions are open, and we always love sponsors. Registration is also available for Tech.Strong's DevOps Connect DevSecOps Day at RSAC in San Francisco on April 24th. Be sure to look for us at the Moscone West on Broadcast Alley, where we will be live streaming all week. So stop by and say hi. You can register for all of our events by going to techstrongevents.com, and be sure to tune into Tech.Strong TV every day for amazing interviews and content. All right, Tracy, what's on your mind today?
So over the weekend, my in-laws called us frantic because they got hit with ransomware.
Ooh.
And, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, ransomware is so scary, especially for, older people to have to deal with. And I'm thinking, they just don't know enough to prevent ransomware. And so I thought I'd do a little digging to see if there was something happening out there in the ransomware world. And sure enough, there was, I'd call it a rash of ransomware attacks over the last week. And they actually were able to, according to Reuters, they broke into the Florida Supreme Court. And several universities. Apparently, they only brought home about $88,000, which is a drop in the bucket considering to our past ransomware problems. This was a specific problem around VMware, and VMware has put out a fix and said, okay, update your systems if you're using VMware. But I just thought it was a worthy thing to talk about because we were all worried about a balloon floating over our heads at the time. And people were being hit with ransomware attacks, which are still real and still a problem, and people still should be looking out for it. And, we had Jamie Thomas on a call. She's with IBM, a high-level exec, and she said something that I'll never forget. And she said, we can do a whole lot to secure our software, but it's the human that opens the door. So how do we continually fight these sneaky ways of ransomware taking over our machines and making a hell of a weekend for older couples who have no idea how to fix it? So that's my newsworthy tip of today, is to check out the ransomware attacks that hit us last week, including potentially the Florida Supreme Court, which, according to Reuters, they did not respond.
Wow. That's crazy to me. It's the Florida Supreme Court. That's kind of scary.
Yeah, it can hit anybody. It's not just, grandma and grandpa, right?
Absolutely. But, the grandma and grandpa part is pretty scary because it's, they're the ones that are being targeted because they're the ones who are most likely to be fooled into, oh, your child or someone in your contact list is reaching out. Click on this,
Exactly.
So that's real. Well, thanks, Trace. All right, we're ready to get rolling here. I want to introduce you guys to our guests today, Adriana Villela and Ana Margarita Medina, a couple of my newly found pals who've been partnering with us on the SRE show. And they're both working at Lightstep these days. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about them. Adriana, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Adriana Villela, or Adriana Villela. I'm from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, so I often pronounce, but I've been in Canada for like 33 years now, so I just anglicized my name, a lot easier to deal with. I'm a developer advocate at Lightstep. This is my first developer advocacy role, but I feel like I've been preparing for it my whole life. Most of my career has been in Java development, like for 16 years. Moved over to the DevOps side of things and fell in love. And everything's been just trending towards like the DevOps, SRE, observability side of things. And, I've blogged a lot about all sorts of tech things, and that's what got me my developer advocate role at Lightstep. So here I am, happy to be here.
Nice. All right, Anna, you're up.
Yes. Hi, all. My name's Ana Margarita Medina. I'm also representing Latinos. I was born and raised in Costa Rica. My parents are from Nicaragua, and I now reside in San Francisco, California. I work as a staff developer advocate over at Lightstep, and I've been working in the SRE space for a few years. Prior to my current role, I was doing chaos engineering at a startup called Gremlin. And prior to that, I was an SRE at Uber and doing cloud infrastructure and developer platform there. And prior to finding the space of DevOps and SRE and infrastructure, I was actually one of those developers that just focused on code. So I started out in front end, moved on to back end and mobile applications shortly after. And it worked on my machine and it was someone else's problem. So it was kind of fun to end up in SRE and be like, I'm on call for systems. Like that's not what I know.
Right?
Wait, that's not what I signed up for.
So it's kind of nice to bring a full circle nowadays and be able to like talk about when I was just a front-end developer and didn't care about anything else. So now kind of looking at a whole system and finding ways to make it more reliable. And I work in the open source community with CNCF projects such as Captain and OpenTelemetry.
And that's where I think we should start our conversation today. I am a huge advocate for CD events. We have, for now, quite some time built these pipelines that are very, well, they're not declarative. Let's just put it that way. They're far from being declarative. Everything is scripted. Every workflow has to have its own pipeline file. And it is it's a problem. It really is. Because at this point, in terms of security, let's ask, a large enterprise that have hundreds or maybe thousands of pipeline workflows that they have to update to add SBOM generation to the process. Captain was one of the first kind of tools that I really started looking at that was taking the event processing and having an event listener with a payload a little more serious. Please. And the CD Foundation has a whole CD events group that's working closely with Captain. And I think there's a few other tools that are finally starting to think about, how to make events work. But Anna, tell us about Captain. Tell us about CD events and why they're important.
Yeah, so Captain is a project that got started in, I want to say 2019, time's a little bit of a blur right now, with folks from Dynatrace trying to find ways to make sure that we think about SRE operations, make them driven based on events. So we started looking at a way for you to have like a delivery pipeline and have SLO evaluations and have room for you to do chaos engineering, chaos testing that allowed for you to build confidence in making sure that every time you deploy to your next stage closer to the customer, you're still keeping the reliability goals in mind. And it's taken a lot of evolution. We've gotten a lot of feedback from users, and we reached Captain 1.0 for KubeCon North America over in Detroit in October. So we're at Captain 1.0, and we're looking at, we're shifting to Captain Lifecycle Controller, which comes in more specifically with those events. We want to know how what we're deploying onto Kubernetes, how it's actually like being deployed and the evolution of it. Is there any issues? Is there anything in the logs that we can actually report back to Captain so that it can actually take action for you and help you get to the next stage or roll back and such? And we don't have that right now. Like we're deploying and a lot of it ends up being manually still, like that pipeline. And we don't have consistency around applications. So we're really finding this space where like big enterprises that need to roll out to 100 services at a time, they don't have an easy way to keep everything in the same consistent manner, and making sure that that feedback loop is also like quick and tight.
Yeah. And you don't want to get me started on talking about the problem that we have underneath the DevOps pipeline. We have all this data that we do nothing with. It's there, and you could go dig for it to find the answer, but we're not leveraging it to start automating responses. And that's what Ortelius is working with Captain on. So we probably should chat on a different time and channel and dig into it, because it's a really interesting area. I mean, if you talk to the Jenkins community, they're starting to look at CD events as well. And I believe that we'll see a shift in how pipelines are managed over the course of the next few years. Do you think that people are going to start embracing an event-based, listener, just like we have, cloud events? Why not have CD events, right?
I think we are, because we're starting to see that our infrastructure is constantly changing. And if we don't have a way for that to report back, it's kind of hard to make sure that things are running smooth. Like I know with Captain, a lot of the work that's been done with workflows and Argo has been to push that forward. Like, how can that workflow be as clean as possible that you can then actually integrate with another project such as OpenTelemetry to observe your entire deployment, which is kind of hard to do currently. Yeah.
You want to tell us a little bit about OpenTelemetry? A lot of our viewers may not have heard it or used it.
Yeah, so OpenTelemetry is a project that was also, I think, started in 2019. This came together merging from multiple projects working in the space, from Open Tracing was one of them.
And Census.
Census, yes, Open Census. And it kind of allows for you to have a vendor neutral way for you to collect telemetry data. So it leverages the Open Telemetry collector that gets telemetry data such as events, logs, and traces from your applications, which you're instrumenting with OTel libraries. And then the OTel collector is able to send that over to your vendor of your choice, such as Lightstep, Honeycomb, Grafana, or an open source tool. And it's kind of neat in some ways. And I only got started in OpenTelemetry when I joined Lightstep in 2022. But Adriana actually got a chance to be an end user before she started working at Lightstep, that she might be able to chime in if I missed anything specific, OTel.
Yeah, I think you got the main points of OTel. The collector is so there's different ways to send data to your observability backend. You can do it directly from your code, but the recommended way is through the OTel collector, because then it's basically like a data pipeline. So you can extract, transform, and then send off your data to the observability vendor of your choice. And if you want, the vendor neutral aspect of OpenTelemetry and the collector makes it so that if you wanted to, you could send telemetry data to multiple observability backends. So if you're considering two vendors, you can basically do a vendor bake-off. You're sending the same data to those two vendors, and you can see how is it that they render your data differently, right? They're all receiving the same data. It's a matter of what they do with the data that will help differentiate it. So my job before Lightstep at 2Cows, I was actually managing an observability team. And so we were trying to bring OpenTelemetry into the organization, because when we joined, it was basically it was an observability team in name only. It was basically a team that managed a bunch of internal open source tools. And I'm okay, no, we need to standardize on things. And they were already using an observability vendor, a SaaS product. So I'm okay, let's just ditch the internally managed tool. Let's make sure everyone pivots to this vendor that we're already using. Let's standardize on OpenTelemetry, and let's basically spread the word of observability to the rest of the organization. So we became an observability practices team instead, focusing on making sure that we are actually practicing observability rather than, oh, we're sending logs to blah, blah, blah vendor. We've got observability. So that was a really big part of our mission. But the interesting thing was, so I joined 2Cows in 2021, and we were exploring OpenTelemetry in the summer, fall of 2021. And I think the OpenTelemetry traces had just gone to general availability in the fall. So I'm trying to pitch this thing that basically is fairly new to this company say, guys, this is going to be the next big thing. Seriously, y'all have to move over to this thing. And they're like, open telemetry doesn't feel like it's ready yet. And I'm like, no, trust me, it's going to be the big thing. So here we are. Open telemetry, I think now like metrics and traces are general availability. Logs are on their way. They're not there yet, but I think like so many improvements, so many different like strides have been made in open telemetry since I came into using the project. And now like I'm super excited to be part of the open telemetry community myself. Like I'm one of the leads of the open telemetry end user working group. So we're always looking for people who use open telemetry in real life, who can talk about like some of their challenges, and so that we can share their feedback with the open telemetry maintainers so that they can continue to improve open telemetry.
Thank you for that. That was a great description of open telemetry and its history. It's one of those open source projects that's an excellent example of when contributors, even competitors, get together to solve a problem, and they do a really good job of it. I started watching it when it first came out, and people started talking about it. I was like, yeah, it's something that really needs to be done. But it's one of those things that it's like, somewhere along the line, we all agreed on, in the US at least, what plugs should look like, right? Now they're different in Europe, but all the plugs in Europe are different the same way. So I don't think that a lot of people who are outside of the tech world understand the problems that we have of plugging things into each other. And open telemetry was a really good example of how to solve that problem. I want to talk to you both about your branding. Both of you have you're out there. I know, Anna, why don't you talk about your podcast for a minute? I don't think you told us about your podcast.
Yeah, so it's not just my podcast. Adriana and I co-host on Call Me Maybe podcast. So it's a Lightstep sponsored podcast with a fun spin to it, where we talk about DevOps, SRE, on-call, incident response, observability, just about everything in between. And we really focus on having quite a diverse lineup from folks that just are getting started joining observability, to folks that are launching companies in the incident response space, or maybe just an SRE that's like coming and sharing the stories. But it's been really awesome to see it grow. We just wrapped up season 1. So we have 13 episodes out there that folks can listen to. And just this upcoming February 14, we're actually launching season 2, and we put episodes out every single week. And there's a lot of fun speakers coming out this season, from like the security perspective to more of observability mindset, like quality assurance, like how do all these things kind of come together in the big world.
That's awesome. That's awesome that you guys are able to do that, because in terms of, we are talking about Tech.Strong.Women, and we all know that women don't normally go into this field, oftentimes because they don't have good mentors and they're not looking up to people. But so you guys are, we're trying to do that here at Tech.Strong.Women. I think what you guys are doing is pretty important too, so that we have younger women seeing us in these roles. It'll make it easier for them to go into these roles. And I have to tell you, both of you are from Latin American countries. In our Ortelius project, some of our strongest contributors are from the same areas. Do you guys do any work with kind of really encouraging other folks from Latin countries to get involved in open source? Have you thought about doing that?
So I can only speak for myself. I work with organizations such as Code 2040 and Tecnologicas that really focus on getting Latinos, Latinx girls into code, especially from a young age. And Code 2040 expands on also for Black students as well. But the focus is never specifically open source. It's let's get you into the door of technology. And I've always felt that has been the right choice. I think in the last 3 or 4 years, we have seen more movement when the pandemic of open source is a great door for you to get into the tech community, and especially like where you're now getting closer to US market rates because you're in the open source community. And I know there's two organizations that specifically work with getting more students into open source that actually like give you grants. I know one of them is like Google Summer of Code.
Yeah.
And they like target a lot of diverse students. I know Captain works with them. And like those kind of projects, like to me, make a lot of sense, but I have yet to go through like a one-on-one mentoring through one of them.
I feel it's in general, in terms of a geographical area, it's under leveraged. There's a lot of really technical people coming from, Costa Rica and Brazil, Chile, all over Latin America, Mexico. Some of our strongest contributors for Ortelius come from those areas. Not women, though. We don't see as many women. So the two of you are also very unique. And you're both at Lightstep. So there was something going on there, right? And kudos to Lightstep. Adriana, you wrote a pretty interesting article that, is near and dear to my heart. And some of it has to do with, first of all, the article was on what you called psychological safety. Mm-hmm. And I talked to a lot of folks, especially in the SRE field, who don't feel like they have the ability to fail fast. And for SREs, just like you described, trying to bring in open telemetry, right? Upper management often doesn't provide us the ability to fail fast. Talk to us a little bit about that psychological safety and what it means to fail fast and how a team can grow from that.
Yeah, so I can draw a lot of that. I draw from some of my own personal experience, like just being fresh out of school and making mistakes, right? And feeling like there's like a magnifying glass on you whenever you make a mistake. And then the stakes get higher and higher, like when you start touching production systems. Forget like making a mistake in code before it goes to production. But when you're like using you're on a live production system and you make mistakes and something goes wrong, and you've got like people breathing down your neck, either because you're the cause of it or because they want you to fix it right away. And, next thing you know, you find yourself on a call with like, 15 people, and a bunch of them are execs, and they're like making suggestions like restart the database. I touched code 15 years ago, and I remember that that's what we did. And you're like, oh my God, just go away. Let me do my damn
Control,
job.
Alt, Delete,
Undo.
Undo.
Such a stressful situation. And under that magnifying glass and not being given the opportunity to like just take a step back and do your thing and, have a chance to fail, embrace failure. That is so stressful for people who are under that magnifying glass, especially SREs, and not being able to fail fast, I think is a detriment because first of all, it causes like PTSD. I mean, there are people who will straight up never again, like it says on call in the job description, bye-bye, right? And that's a shame because I think, one of the things that Anna and I talked about, like we had so many guests on our podcast where they showed us a better way to SRE. So I know that there's a better way to SRE out there. One of them is just having that kind of empathy and allowing people to learn from their mistakes. I mean, as technologists, our biggest learnings are from our mistakes. It's great when something works right off the bat, oh, it worked just like in the manual. Awesome. But like our greatest learnings are from the things that like go up in flames, the raging dumpster fires. Those are the greatest opportunities to learn stuff. And if we're suppressing that in our engineers, then that's like a lost opportunity, right? Because
upper management has to be have their teams back, right?
Yeah,
they have to be able to say, they have to stand up there. It comes from either the director level or at minimum the manager level. They have to have their teams back in order for that to work.
Exactly. Yeah. And without that support, like you're not going to trust your manager if you know your manager doesn't have your back, and then you won't be forthcoming with them, and you certainly won't be like, oh yeah, that was my fault. Like I have no problem admitting to a mistake, but it's like extra scary when you know that it's going to cause like, your manager and his manager and his manager to like come breathing
and
over.
that's a problem, because everybody in technology is going to make a mistake, and we should be able to say, hey, I made a mistake. I know how to fix it. Let's move forward. Let me fix it and let's move forward. Which takes me to chaos engineering. I did a kind of a book club on chaos engineering because I find it to be way overdue. The author was Casey Rosenthal. He said something of, I said, give me an example of chaos engineering. And he said, and there was a guy on the Zoom who had a cat sitting on the back of his chair, and his name was George. And he said, well, let's assume George's cat gets sick, and George is up all night because he had to take his cat to the emergency room. And he gets to work the next morning and he has to do a production release, and he fat fingers something. Traditionally, what we would do is spend all this time screaming at each other, trying to find out what happened, looking for root cause analysis. And the root cause analysis was George's cat. How did that benefit us? What we really have to do is build a good way to respond to any problem. It's the response that's critical, not looking for root cause analysis or to point fingers. That is the essence of failing fast, right?
100%. And it's like, you don't necessarily just have to embrace failure. I go ahead and I say you need to look for opportunities to fail, like create those opportunities and constantly practice it. Because one, it goes to the idea of unknown failures that can happen to your system. And you kind of want to play with your systems to find where it can break, so that you go ahead and you make it resilient to those failures. But at the same time, you don't want to stop there, because our systems are quite complex and they're constantly changing. That means that every single failure is going to be different than the last. So you also have to get comfortable with setting up a cadence to do these type of failure injections, or just failovers between data centers, or running runbooks. That way your team actually knows what to do when that moment comes, that they actually do need to restore from a backup, that they need to deploy a whole bunch of new services, or restart some of the servers that are running on COBOL or anything like that.
Yeah, those game days are so important. I mean, imagine if we never sent, think of SREs are first responders. If we look at the industry of first responders and take firefighting, for example, thank goodness that we don't wait for a fire before we send a firefighter into a burning building. They go practice that. So why should the SRE role be any different? They should have that opportunity to go through that, do their fail fast, have the support of their upper management, and have game days to learn how to do it. The last thing you really want to do is try, as you, both of you being on call, and I have been there too, is try to debug something at 3:00 in the morning. It's a horrible time. Or really bad for me would be Friday at 5:00, which is generally when those problems occur, because they're like, oh, we'll deploy something on Friday. And then the person on call is sitting there while everybody else goes to the bar.
Yeah, that first responder analogy is really, I've never heard anybody use that for SRE, but it's really appropriate because, think about, you're a paramedic, but no one teaches you to do CPR until somebody needs it. And they're like, okay, let's learn CPR right now. That's an amazing analogy, Tracy. Because you guys really are first responders, for sure. You are a
first responder. SREs are first responders. They're the ones that are sticking their neck out. They're the ones that are going to take the chance to see if this will work to get the system up and running. And that psychological safety is such a great term. And I really enjoyed the article. I encourage everybody to go to the Lightstep blogs and look up that article about psychological safety in the workplace. It's important, especially for SREs, because I've met some really stressed out DevOps engineers and SREs, especially during COVID. Holy Toledo. What was going on there? Why was there so much? What was your what was your experience?
We ran a conference, a gremlin called Failover Conf, which was like our response to all the events actually being canceled due to COVID. And we're like, hey, speakers, fail over your talk to another conference, come to Failover Conf. And one of the speakers was from PagerDuty. I can't remember who she was right now, but she gave an amazing talk, like of starting to look at the data that was coming in for incidents that were happening that year. And you can start seeing like the increase in amount of incidents. You can start seeing like the increase of amount of pages that they were getting compared to like prior to COVID-19 being as big as it was in early 2020. And a lot of it was because we were stressing our systems to extreme demands that no one had ever thought about. All of a sudden, all of us had to use online banking because we couldn't go into a branch to find out our balance, to make a transaction, something that you would do by just walking on over or driving over. Then we also saw like a movement to like delivery applications for groceries, for pharmacy. And those were maybe getting like, let's say 20 visitors a day. Now you're looking at 100, 200 visitors a day. And the system couldn't handle that amount of unique IDs signing in, along with running like all those like synchronous like executions on the API that they were leveraging. And then we also have hard drives filling up with data. So all these things happening in these complex systems, I think, led to a lot of cascading failures. And we already were, as a society, pretty stressed out. So I think it all ended up being like a bad mixture, and companies were not set to be on call. So they didn't have healthy practices at all. Like there was documentation out there on how to do it, but not as many organizations were actually following through on like doing blameless postmortems, making sure that you're doing hands-off on incidents at like timely manners, or even have worked with the teams long enough to know how to like triage an incident. Like there was no game days. And all of a sudden you were having failures, and it's the first time that like you're doing a Zoom incident response. And like it's not the same to be in the same room than when you have 20 people on a Zoom call, or maybe even more, because people are like, well, I'm bored. This seems like a water cooler.
Yeah, no, I think, the SREs during COVID were unsung heroes that don't get enough credit for keeping the systems up and running. Like you said, everything from doing your banking to grocery shopping, something so basic, right? Can you imagine what those systems were looking like when everybody was doing, they had not only just the stress of their own lives, and they're having to add all of that on top of it. So Adriana, I don't want to end this call without letting you talk a little bit about what Lightstep is up to and why observability is so important to SREs.
Well, I would say observability basically gives SRE superpowers. Like Anna and I had a discussion where, I was talking about like modern SRE practices. And I would say, modern SRE practices, quote unquote, is about making sure that you've got observability as part of your tool belt in SRE. Because observability gives you that, information about your system, right? It's about giving you the information so that you can follow the breadcrumbs to understand why is this happening, right? And yeah, we had like logs and stuff before back in the day, awesome, but now like I'd like to think we've moved beyond that. I mean, observability is. People talk about like the three pillars of observability. I like to think that observability is more trace driven, with metrics and logs playing supporting roles, and all of them come together to basically explain what's going on, right? The traces give you that end-to-end view of your system, right? So now all of a sudden you have a story happening, unraveling in your system from the minute that a user says, okay, add this to my shopping cart, to, it going all the way to whatever, however many microservices and back, and adding it, and the user seeing that item in their shopping cart. Now you have that end-to-end visibility. So you've got the traces telling the story. The metrics can provide additional information, like latency and, any other stuff like CPU levels, memory usage. And then the logs give you that extra contextual information of like, oh, this is the thing that happened at this particular point in time when this other sub operation was occurring. Can you imagine not having like that nice end-to-end picture? And so that, I'd say this is the place of observability in the SRE world.
And how do you, in terms of, we talk about self-healing and Kubernetes being self-healing. How far are we? I'm not in the observability space. I understand it. But how far are we from being able to take that information and start automating some of the fixes that SREs normally would have to go out and do manually? Are observability tools starting to do that? Not just providing the information, but acting upon the information?
I feel like we've got a bunch of the pieces in place that can enable us to do that. Like, I think SLOs can help drive some of that. And then there's like a bunch of tools that automate workflows. So then you can have like, your SLOs ingest the data emitted by your system. Like it ingests your telemetry that drives the SLO. And then, you hit a particular target in your SLO that can trigger a particular workflow to do blah, right? It's like, oh, my CPU is down to like, it's like 99% usage. Oh, that's like too high. So then it can trigger some sort of workflow to do whatever to lower that CPU usage. I definitely think that we've got a lot of the pieces in play. I guess the question is whether or not we've got companies taking advantage of that, and whether or not, so both internally, like companies using their available tooling to do that, and then startups basically saying, hey, that's a cool idea. We can make a product out of that.
We actually had, that was actually one of the things that we did with Captain, like the auto remediation steps at first. That was like the one of the amazing use cases that folks were using it for, where it's like you have the SLO, which is kind of driven by observability. And then that would allow for you to like SLO breach, here's the auto remediation. You just need to scale pods. And then now your SLO is actually accurate. So you're good. Now you can actually promote this to production. I've seen a lot more companies working in that space of auto remediation. I think it would make sense if it's observability companies helping help drive this movement a lot more. But I think we also leave it up to customers and end users to decide what they want to do. Like, do they want the company that has all the observability data to actually be taking actions upon their systems? Because that's also like a different privilege than what you're letting folks get from telemetry data.
And we just brought the conversation all the way back around to CD events. Because that's really what we're talking about, right? Being able to have a standard listener and be able to execute a workflow with a payload based on that standard listener, whether that listener be looking over the CD pipeline or looking at observability triggers. That is why I preach events so strongly in the CD pipeline, because it is where we're going to build our real automation. And automation is key in all of this. And as you both know, with microservices, you just have that much more. Instead of just deploying one monolithic all the time, now you're deploying a giant Lego system. So CD events, I think, will save us in the future. Let's just end it on that.
You guys have the best little terms for stuff. I love having a bake-off, Adriana. That was like amazing. First responders. I mean, we came up with a lot of really fun stuff here. Before we finish up here, can one of you guys give us the skinny on the On Call Me Maybe podcast? Where can people find it? When do new episodes show up?
So we're launching season 2 on February 14th. And also we're super excited about the season because we've revamped some of our branding. So we've got some fun graphics. We've got our On Call Me Maybe Llamas that are part of our new look. So we just posted on our socials today with our llamas teasing season 2. You can find us on all the socials. I think we've got pretty much everything. We've got LinkedIn, Twitter, Mastodon, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. So be sure to follow us on all of those.
Everywhere. That's awesome.
We will.
All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us. What a great conversation. It's really exciting to see the younger women that are out there. And
it was a pleasure, ladies. It really was.
Being active, and we really appreciate you taking time. We know you are busy SREs. So we appreciate you taking time to be with us. And thanks for everyone for tuning into another episode of Tech.Strong.Women. We'll see you soon, and keep watching Tech.Strong TV for great content and great interviews. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.